where she is also a mentor to female students and established the Association of Academic Women's Emerging STEM Scholar Award at UF, which promotes the career of a young woman in the final year of her doctoral studies. So welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today for this special presentation. I want to start by asking a very broad question, which is, when you expressed interest in computers or science, technology, what was the reaction like? Mehul, I would like to start with you, just so you can share your personal experience with us.
Well, personally, I belong to the kind of family where education is placed very highly, very important. So when I expressed an interest, my parents were more than happy to send me off to do engineering. And also because I had always had an interest in this field, and they sort of knew that I have an inclination, and also I'm good at that field. So they were more than happy to sort of send me off.
Very nice. What about you, Zamzam?
For me, when I told my mom I want to do computer science, she was like, "What is that?" I don't know what that is, but all the best.
When I was very young, my grandfather was actually the one to first provide my computer and really drive my love of educational gaming, which is one of the areas that I focus in today. And he was behind me when I decided to pursue a computer science degree, even though I didn't actually finish the degree. I switched majors, rather, but I've had overwhelming support, for sure.
And what about you, Aisha?
Well, my father is a doctor and my mother is a math teacher, and my father actually wanted to be an engineer and my mother wanted to be a ballerina, so my sister became the ballerina and I became the engineer.
Well,
so
look at that. So we're really good kids, you know, making your parents' dreams come true. Well, of course. So the thing is, I mean, it's really amazing to find out that all of you had a very positive, a good support network when you wanted to pursue this career. But the fact is that when we look around the world, it's not so easy for many other women, especially when it comes to this basic resource of internet technologies. It's just being able to access the World Wide Web. And one of the reasons for that is that in many parts of the world, it's just not considered appropriate or necessary for women to go online. In other parts, it's difficult for them to go outside their house to go online. And then telecom technology, while it has come a long way, is not entirely affordable for people around the world. If you look at the numbers in terms of how many women are online today versus men, you will see that in Africa, Africa basically has the smallest number of women online, and the numbers actually have gotten a little worse over the years. The gender gap has actually increased in Africa. Asia and the Arab states are kind of similar in numbers, but you still see that there is a difference between men and women. What you will notice is interesting is that in the Americas, there are more women online, and that's because there's greater gender parity over there and also greater opportunities for women to get tertiary education. But the issue that happens is that billions of women around the world right now are being deprived of opportunities to access knowledge online that could help develop their skills, their communities, and everybody's quality of life. So, Mehul, on your campus in Manipal, you actually had to work on projects that would engage girls. When we think about these situations, we think about, you know, scenarios where women are not educated, and we will talk about that. But you actually were on a campus, and you still saw that it wasn't really easy for women to come up and talk about their ideas and have easy access to resources. Tell us a little bit about that.
I feel like growing up, we always had role models who were men. So whenever we were in an environment, let's say a competition or a hackathon, which is quite frequent in a college like mine, so we always thought that the boys were going to do better, because of which the girls would never come up and participate in these events at all. So a lot of times when I went to these events, I was the only girl in the room, and the room was filled with boys. And so I always tried to participate with other women, and it would be very difficult for me to find another partner who was actually a woman. So I felt like growing up in an environment where you're constantly told that if you're a girl, you're probably not as good as the boys in math or in a science field, you sort of begin to internalize that kind of a bias. And I think that's where all this comes from. So, yeah.
And Zamzam, like you said, that your mother didn't really know what computers were, and you grew up in a community like that where people had less exposure to it. Growing up, from now where you have come, what do you think could have been done in your community to make internet and technology something familiar for women?
In my community, you find that people don't even have access to smartphones. They have something like a feature phone. It has internet, access to internet, and it has SMS you can call. But people don't even know that they can access internet through their phone. They don't even know the phone is technology. So to tell someone, hey, let's go do something computer, and you're like, what is that? What am I going to do there? They don't even realize the importance of internet access. Because most people don't even see computers around. So
how were you exposed to it then?
For me, I went to high school in the capital city, and when I went to high school, I saw computers, and the first time we had a computer class, I'm like, what is this? It just blew my mind, and break time, I came back and actually opened up the computer. I'm like, how did something that I typed came to the screen? And it just, my high school teacher came and found me opening up the computer, and he was like, what are you doing? You just got this chance to come to this amazing high school, and do you want to blow it up? I said, no, just my curiosity got the better of me.
So the first time was a little scary, almost.
Yes. But that teacher actually encouraged me and connected me with Microsoft. They have a program called DigiGirls. And that program, I got mentors, amazing women who are dealing with policymakers in the government, and some ladies who are dealing with ICT. And that kind of gave me the passion, hey, she came from where you came from, and she's where she is now. I can do it too.
So there were other women who inspired you.
Yes, yes.
The good thing is we have questions also from our online community, some questions that came to us through videos. So let's take a look at one of those questions, and then we'll take this conversation forward. So the question is from Uganda, and they want to know what strategies can we use to bring technology to women in remote communities. And Nicole, I want to ask you this question because you have worked with people in different parts of the country. You're also running a website that helps people kind of learn the tricks of the trade themselves. So when it comes to remote communities, where people don't really know even from the get-go what technology really is, how do you break that knowledge barrier?
That's a great question, and it's something that I've really been working. I had to recognize that immediately as one of the challenges of the work that I was choosing to do, very important work. And actually, I was acutely aware of the fact that even here in the United States of America, myself being a Native American woman in computing, one of very few, accessibility of internet issues in remote areas on Native American reservations is a huge issue. And so trying to actually bring educational technology back to my Native communities has been incredibly difficult in some ways because not every Native community has the same resources depending on where they might be located geographically. I have friends, for instance, on the Warm Springs Reservation in Oregon, and was just looking up Warm Springs Telecom, the one telecom company they have. We're so used to in the United States being able to call up, you know, any company and they'll be there in a couple of days to install internet and you're up and running. They're one company, the ultimate package for, you know, internet and phone communication, had a 4 megabyte per second download speed and 1 megabyte per second up. This is in 2017. That's here in the United States, where we look at these numbers and think, oh, we're doing a lot better. So if that's here in the States, I can really, I haven't even begun to dig under the tip of the iceberg when it comes to accessibility issues in remote areas. And we had Megan Smith, CTO, show up and stand up and share some of her insight as to the planning for, you know, the future and bringing, it's not acceptable. And I'm so happy to see that that's not even, you know, up for debate. It's not acceptable because this really is sequestering women worldwide and here in our own country from education that they need. My life was changed and transformed by educational technology and the accessibility. So it's a great question, and I haven't found a solution to it, but we're working, and I'm glad to see, especially here at Grace Hopper, that that is of utmost importance too.
Aishagul, there was something that Zamzam said that is similar to your experience as well. She said that she saw other women and was motivated by them. You had a female mentor when you were in Turkey, and now you are mentoring other women. Tell us a little bit about how having a female, a woman, guide you gives you a different experience compared to when a man is guiding you?
Yeah, so I actually, so in my college, you're assigned your undergraduate advisor. You don't pick them, and I was assigned a female professor who was very established and very, highly esteemed. She and I actually never talked about women's issues in engineering or in society in general. But just having this door open to me and to go talk about just the mundane issues like which courses should I select, is this a good senior design project, just gave me that confidence and belief that I actually belonged here, and there were, I actually didn't see any of those barriers. And in fact, she was the one that encouraged me to come to the United States for my graduate studies. So I do owe her quite a bit. I think one of the quotes that is repeated over and over at this conference is that you can't be what you can't see. So I was very fortunate to have her as that role model. And I continue to be very fortunate today because I have a female department chair and a female dean at the College of Engineering. So again, go Gators.
Of course.
But also, I just wanted to point out something that Diane Green said yesterday, that when a young person asked her, if you don't have the mentors, what do you do? And she actually said, well, one of the mentors or one of the persons she had mentioned, I actually never interacted with her, but the fact that she was there just made the difference. So although you might not have the chance to interact with these people, I think just having these...
Just having them there really helps.
Yeah,
it helps you connect.
having these people in these leadership roles basically, can make the difference.
So we also have questions that came through us via videos, because some women in different parts of the world who have communicated with us were lucky enough to have access to mobile technology. So let's take a look at what one of them wanted to ask.
So many women they do not have access to phone. Maybe the husband is so jealous, or so I don't know, it has been bothering me. So I want to know why so many men don't allow their wife to handle phone. Another question is, another thing is, I myself, I don't have the interest in internet browsing. So if there is a way they can let me know or teach me or talk to me or talk to women that the benefit of browsing and internet.
So I actually want to split it into two questions. One is jealous husbands or men in your house, in your family who don't let you have access to technology. And the other one is, how can you tell women that browsing on the internet is actually useful for them? So Nicole, I want to talk to you again about this, because you have worked in communities where you had to engage people. What's your pitch when you go and talk to young girls or to their families, their parents? How do you make it, how do you make them understand that it's worth their while?
Another great question. It's interesting with young girls in particular, because I found that, especially myself as a young girl, I didn't particularly need a whole lot besides the engagement and kind of the on-ramp and the opportunity, which I think is really what a lot of folks find once the tools and the accessibility is there, that people will often take off from that point. The families, however, are a different matter, because especially for women in technology, I've noticed in African American communities, of which I have the intersectionality between African American and Native American as well, there is a lot of confusion about why it's necessary, what it is, what you're going to do. And also there's a fear that it's never going to be seen again in our own community, that somebody will go off and further their education, for example, and then it won't come back, that they won't come back effectively. I know in Native communities especially that can be a fear. And especially where we don't have computer science programs often close to reservations, that then makes this education very difficult. So convincing parents that they should let their young girls explore, even if it takes them away from home, is probably one of the biggest challenges, because that's the way that families and parents think in those communities.
And who wants to take on the jealous husband?
Well, if I can follow up on that question. So my mother never used a computer until I left for my graduate studies to America. And she figured out that, she couldn't reach me on the phone anytime she wanted because of the, time difference. So she sat down and tinkered with it, and she figured it out. So we started Skyping, and now she does everything online from her banking to, finding addresses. So I think, first of all, telling people that it's a great way to communicate with loved ones can get them interested. And after that, I think once people continue to tinker with it, they can, figure out for themselves, because it just opens this huge horizon for them.
And I was just wondering, could this also be a part of the problem that when people think of internet, a lot of times they're thinking of social media platforms only. They're thinking of Facebook, they're thinking of Twitter, they think people will just be posting pictures or communicating with total strangers. They're not really thinking about websites where you can go and learn, where you can develop your skills. What was your experience like, Mehul?
I feel like this was a problem or a challenge which I faced when I was younger. So initially, when the days of the very first social media was out, it was such a taboo in my house also to not use social media as such, because the perception was that it's the kind of place where people are going to track you or look at your photographs, and that was not very acceptable at that point of time. So I feel like from there, certainly in households like mine, we have definitely come a long way in terms of the fact that it is now seen or perceived as a medium of communication and connection, and not just some place where you upload pictures and people are going to see that. So definitely the idea of that has evolved. But certainly I do believe that in a lot of other households, the perception is still the same, that you want to keep your women protected, and for that purpose you don't want them to be online on certain platforms because you feel that it's exposing too much of yourself. So.
Zamsap, did your family or your community have any concerns about what you would be doing with computers?
When I told them I want to do computer science, my mother didn't know what it was. But I had a bigger brother who was like, did you do research on it? Do you know what you're going to do with it? I said, I want to do PhD. I'm like, what? And it's kind of scary, telling someone something they don't know and saying, hey, you want to go far with that.
Right.
And the fear of, hey, does she know what she's doing? Because they themselves, they don't know what you're doing. Right. So the fear of, hey, she might need help later on or something like that. Yeah.
All right. So let's take a look at one more question that our online community has sent us. So the question is from Haiti. Who decides what's acceptable behavior for women online? And Mehul, that's kind of along the lines of what you said, that, people were worried in your family what you would do with social media. So really, I want to actually get everybody's take on this. Who decides what is acceptable and what isn't? What is the baseline of acceptability? Of course, it's going to be different in different cultures, but who dictates it? Aishagul, if you want to take this first.
Well, at least in the United States, we live in a country where women's health issues are discussed by men. So obviously we have to be the agent for change. No one can tell me what's appropriate behavior. It is my behavior, it's my choice, it is my voice. So I really don't think you should allow anyone to dictate or tell you what's acceptable or not.
Right. Nicole?
I have to agree wholeheartedly. I had hair on the back of my neck, it bristles a little bit when I hear acceptable behavior for women. You could really just remove the online part altogether and say what's acceptable for women in general. The answer to that is whatever women want for themselves, and that's it. There's no further.
But sometimes what is acceptable for women and what isn't, it kind of leads to other situations. It manifests itself in ways that are more unpleasant than just controlling speech. Then it becomes, sometimes it turns into a situation of harassment online, and women are not able to have control of these spaces that belong to them as much as they do to anyone else. Has any one of you ever had to deal with online harassment?
Well, yes. I feel like everybody faces that. All women that I know have definitely it's very common to get random messages online from different people. I think the way to learn is to know how to deal with that, not to respond to it all the time, I feel like, I mean, it's very important to choose your battles. So if you keep responding to everything that everyone says to you, it's going to make your life hell. So sometimes it's good to ignore. So that is probably one way to deal with it.
You've all had to deal with some form of harassment online?
Yes.
Some. You're shaking your head like, oh yeah.
Yeah, in every way. When you post something, first time when I came to America, actually, and I had gathering of friends, and I posted the picture, and someone sent me pictures. Now you're in America, you're posting pictures all over Facebook. And it's my choice what I post and what I don't post. It has nothing to do with you. But, you know, sometimes dealing with cultural beliefs and biases and things, the norm that you're supposed to do, people expect you to
And
do.
they all play a role in
Yeah.
whether women then eventually get access to something so simple and basic as internet or not. We also have a video question that we would like to take a look at, which has come to us from overseas.
There is a dark side of using internet that is affecting a lot of people nowadays. Unfortunately, sexual harassment online is a reality that is affecting a lot of girls, a lot of women. However, there's a way to prevent this. How can we prevent this?
So that is, in a way, I mean, what we see is a lot of times social behaviors that you see in the real world getting translated into the cyber world. So what are some of the, let's say, strategies that you tried to thwart sexual harassment? Because I was looking at numbers for at least Pakistan. The Digital Rights Foundation in Pakistan actually did a study, and they said that 40% of women who use the internet in Pakistan have been victims of sexual harassment online, and also of extortion by men just using their pictures to extort money out of them. But another interesting thing was that 70% of those women who go online in Pakistan, at least, do not know the rights that they have, and they also don't know the terms and conditions of various platforms that they're using. And those terms and conditions are long. Who's going to spend all the time reading those? So when you are online and you feel like you're not being heard and you're actually being sort of cornered, what is a good idea? How can you protect your privacy and protect your sanity?
So I think your digital marks, the digital marks that you make are there forever. So you have to be conscious of that, and therefore you have to, make good choices of what you want to post. Especially this pertains to images that you put. They will always be there. But I think when it comes to ideas, I don't think anyone should ever suppress what they want to say.
And I would assume that you would all agree with this.
Yeah.
Nicole, I want to ask you this question because we're talking about accessibility. In different parts of the world, what we have also seen happen is that through government grants, through organizations that do social development work, communities will introduce a computer lab in a school, or they will give tablets. Is that good enough? Because if you don't have a tech curriculum to support it, how much benefit can any community get out of physical resources like computers and tablets?
In the short term, I think that there still is a large benefit just to having, especially children and even adults, but truthfully children can pick up these devices and learn them very quickly. I've even seen in a lot of cases, kids start looking for some guidance naturally. And adults tend to find, especially in e-learning situations, they find that without a curriculum, they're asking the questions and seeking the answers. So if they don't manage to find them on their own, then that's where the problem lies. The internet and knowing how to use it to be able to find other curricula that might be out there might not even be an option that they know is available too. But in the long term, there needs to be a curriculum along with technology. In the short term, it can get people started, begin thinking, begin asking questions, start getting engaged. And then when they want the curriculum, it needs to be available.
And then the other issue is also language. English is the primary language of the internet. But if there was more content in local languages, do you think that would also help women access internet a bit more easily, because then they would understand what it's talking to them about?
I do believe that that's very important, because as I mentioned yesterday in my speech also, that a lot of content remains unaccessed because it's in a language which most people don't understand. And especially in a country like India, where there are so many different languages, and every different part has a different language attached to it. So assuming that everybody understands on the same language or is on the same page when it comes to something like language, it's quite I feel like a flawed assumption, because that is not true. And yeah, which is why I think it's very important to have content which can be translated into different languages, so that the accessibility and reach is much larger.
But when you don't have that many people in your community who know internet and who know how to develop all of this content, do you think that the technology sector, even though it prides itself on disrupting normal processes and finding new shortcuts, are we making a mistake by waiting for our policymakers to come into our communities and to help bring all of this to us? Is there something that can be done to sort of not have to wait for governments to come in, for charity organizations to come in, and actually for the technology companies to come in and help speed up that process?
Well, I think a lot of software companies are working on language processing right now. So we're seeing, these translators improve day to day. Turkish is a very different language than Latin-based languages, and I'm sure your languages are as well, both of you. Whenever I see a post that has a translate button, I always check to see how good they are at translating into Turkish, and I'm very happy to see that it's improving more and more. So hopefully that can also help people understand content that are not in their language once we have this better handle on language processing.
Sometimes did you feel like the government had, in a way, not done for you what it could have done, and that some other resources were needed?
For me, I think my country more is affordability of the internet. Even if there's no free access to the internet, because the data is really expensive, and someone who's been working the whole day just to provide that meal wouldn't spend that money on internet and buying data. So the government, I think my government needs to kind of give free access to the internet or some way, or try to limit the competition of the data companies.
And if I may add, it's also up to us engineers to sort of wake up to that call, because it's, as you said, it's not always the policymakers' call to make. As engineers, it should be our responsibility to rise up to that occasion and sort of make technology which is more accessible to our communities, to sort of cater to where we come from ourselves.
Well, there is a lot more to talk about, but we will wrap up this part of our panel discussion right here. But in the next part, we're going to talk about how women and women engineers can make things better for other women in this industry. So stay with us, there's a lot more to come.
If you look at the statistics, there's no doubt that men have more access and use digital technology more than women. That's a fact in almost every country.
If we compare ourselves to the boys, once our mobile internet package ends, even if we're doing something important, we get stuck. Boys are lucky. They can go out and stand wherever they find Wi-Fi signals and work. But it looks odd if us girls do that.
Wi-Fi is easily available everywhere. In my labs, even in the mall, they all offer Wi-Fi now.
Once they have the opportunity, they take a lot of advantage out of it, and they can increase the productivity, they can increase their income, they can increase their education, and they can increase their involvement in the workforce, and therefore kind of like bootstrap themselves out of this inequality.
Everyone uses internet, but the main issue is that if our mobile internet package ends, we cannot leave home to go use internet elsewhere. We can't leave after dark to go get our package renewed. We have to wait till the morning.
Most of my clients are men because a lot of women are not allowed to leave the house in our society. I also think that a lot of women send their brothers or sons to get their internet package renewed.
Internet access does help us leapfrog, so we don't have to go through these traditional primary education, secondary education, and by then maybe they'll get a job. Internet access and free online education can help a girl really bypass all of this and say, look, I can make an app that helps solve this problem. And so I think for the first time in history, technology can really help girls have a strong voice and help us have a society that has equality.
In the U.S., the challenge for women is not internet accessibility, it's access to tech jobs. Here's a look at gender diversity in Silicon Valley. Women hold approximately 25% of all IT jobs. But overall, women only occupy about 11% of all executive positions in Silicon Valley.
Welcome back. I'm Sarah Zaman. If you're just joining us, we're coming to you live from Orlando, Florida, where women from around the world have gathered for the largest convention of women in technology, the Grace Hopper Celebration. This is Breaking Through, a special Voice of America presentation brought to you in partnership with the Anita Borg Institute. In the last half hour of our program, we talked about how internet can be made more accessible for women around the world. But the fact is that when it comes to Silicon Valley, the place where so much of this life-changing technology is created, dire need for change. And that's because Silicon Valley and the tech industry overall here in America is still very much a boys' club, run by white and Asian men. Women barely make up a quarter of the workforce here, and it's rather lonely at the top for those few who manage to reach there. According to the Anita Borg Institute's own data, women technologists leave this sector in a very large number. Almost half of them leave this sector by the time they reach the middle of their career. So what can the tech industry do to become more welcoming for women, to have them come on board in larger numbers and stay and flourish? We will find out from our next panel. But before I introduce the amazing women on this panel, I want you to hear what one woman from the Democratic Republic of Congo told Voice of America about her experience as she tried breaking through.
I spent a lot of months after my graduation refusing jobs because they all wanted me to be a salesperson, and I didn't want to be a salesperson. I had this great idea of having a tech incubator for women, and in my head I was like, okay, I can teach this, I can teach that. The greatest challenge of women to advance in entrepreneurship is the mindset. Everything begins with the mind. So our society has made women think, or women feel, that they are consumers, they are not makers. Most of the applications that are used today across the world, it's used by women, but those women, they don't even care about how it's made. They are waiting for someone to build the solution. But today, with the evolution of mobile use, technology is bringing so many opportunities, and women should grab those opportunities because the world is not going backward, it's going forward, and women need to catch up on that. Close your eyes and imagine Mark Zuckerberg in a female version. They're not going to imagine any woman in lipstick or nice skirt or in yellow. Definitely not. They're going to imagine a nerdy girl with jeans and a t-shirt. This is also something that we need to work with women. They need to understand that you can still look pretty, you can still wear lipstick and still get and be successful in technology and have a business driven by technology.
And now let's meet our panel. First up is Danielle Brown, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Google. Previously, Brown served as Vice President of Human Resources and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Intel. Under Danielle's leadership, Intel saw an increase in U.S. female representation and achieved a full promotion parity and pay parity for women across the corporation. Marie Desjardins, Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at UMBC, College of Engineering and Information Technology. Marie has built a statewide coalition to increase access to K-12 computer science education and is also the Maryland team leader for the expanding computer education pathways. Michelle Leahy, Analytics Program Manager at Anita Borg Institute. Michelle is responsible for the Top Companies for Women Technologists program, which partners with companies to measure their ability to create workplaces where women can thrive. And Paula Tolliver, Corporate Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Intel Corporation. Before joining Intel, she was Corporate Vice President of Business Services and Chief Information Officer at the Dow Chemical Company, where in her 20-year career, she led a services business with $1 billion in revenue. Ladies, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Danielle and Paula, since you are executives in Silicon Valley, I want to start with you. We heard what our speaker from the DRC talked about, her experience, people having certain assumptions about women in this field. Danielle, what was your experience like? What were the challenges you faced as you tried to build your career in this sector?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the woman on the video represents many of us in many ways. It is challenging to be a woman in tech or a woman technologist, and I think all of us know that. A lot of times people question sort of your ability. Your style may be different. The way you approach problems and solve them are different. I'm an executive, and sometimes people still ask me to take notes at meetings and, make assumptions about who I am. You have the experience of regularly being interrupted or talked over, or you have an idea and 5 minutes later, the guy next to you takes your idea and everybody recognizes it for his. So challenges are there, challenges remain.
How did you overcome that? I mean, when somebody does that to you, how do you basically correct them, and how do you make sure that you are the one who's heard and you are the one who gets credit?
Yeah. One of my best strategies for that is finding the other women on the team and at the table and advocating for each other. So it doesn't always feel good in the moment when somebody does take your idea or interrupts them, but if you have an advocate or an ally who says, hey, let's let Danielle finish, or that was a great idea, thank you, we enjoyed hearing it from Danielle a few minutes ago. And so we can really advocate for each other and be each other's allies as well.
Paula, what about you? Because you actually deliberately caused your change from Dow Chemical and entered the tech sector. So what made you make the switch?
So, I think the most important thing that drove my decision was we've never seen such an explosive opportunity right now as we see in the tech industry for the advancements of technologies to really change the world in many ways. And I wanted to be a part of that, in a much more meaningful way. I was CIO at Dow, but now being CIO at Intel and being at the middle of the ecosystem in Silicon Valley and working across many industries, it's exciting. And I personally want women to be more represented in that. And I, like Danielle, have had my challenges, particularly in the executive ranks of finding those partnerships. And I was delighted, actually, when I came to Intel. And obviously, Danielle, with her background as well, knows that, having that network and that ecosystem and growing the support like this organization is doing that at Anita Borg and others, is extremely important for us to grow the numbers and to keep more women in the field. But there are lots of different things that we're doing that are trying to change that trend.
Before we go to our first social media question, Danielle, I quickly want to ask you, since you were at Intel before, did you leave any notes for Paula?
Well, Paula and I were very lucky to have time that overlapped together and worked together at Intel. And again, just speaking of the power of allies and advocates, we had such a strong women's community at Intel, and we have that at Google. We give each other advice, we support each other. In fact, Paula and I spent the half hour before this, her coaching me on how to successfully be a new executive in a new company, how to build a career and be successful and live through a transition. And those bonds are really strong. I think that's why events like Grace Hopper are so important. It's a chance for us to build communities and get support from one another.
All right, so let's move on to our social media and see what one of the users wants to ask this panel. The question is from Nigeria. For many women in my country, the issue is not a lack of access, but a lack of job opportunities. How can this be addressed? And Marie, I want you to actually take this question because you are starting really at the beginning, at grassroots level, where you're helping men and women, young children sort of come towards this field. Tell us a little bit about how that process works and whether it's any different for boys and for girls.
Yeah. So I've been spending a lot of time in the last few years thinking about and working on access to K-12 education for everyone. And one of the things that we see is that in most societies, it's certainly true in the United States, and I think in many countries, entry into computing as a field is self-driven. So it's an elective, it's a choice, it's something that you do outside of the normal curriculum. And what happens is that reinforces existing stereotypes. So the people who choose to do that are the people who feel like the people who are already doing it. And so you get this very limited lack of diversity in the field. So what we've been trying to do is to create pathways into computing that are not only open to everyone, but actually ideally required for everyone, so that in K-12 schools at very young ages, every single child has the opportunity to learn how to code, to learn how computers work, to feel comfortable with computers. And to answer the question about the lack of job opportunities, I think that in this day and age, technology is relevant for every single job. So it doesn't, we're not just talking about people who are going to be computer scientists. In fact, I think that's maybe the smallest part of what we're talking about. It's important to me, it's important to us here, but when you look at the really big global picture, most people are not going to be computer scientists. People are going to be healthcare workers, people are going to work in retail, people are going to work in the financial sector. And if you're in any of those sectors, if you're in any field, if you have computing skills, you're going to advance faster, and you're going to be able to innovate and create those job opportunities for the next generation of people. So I think we really have to think about access to computing for all, not just technologists per se.
So somebody like the person who asked this question about job opportunities, you shouldn't just look in the tech sector. You could approach it in a lot of different ways. Michelle, you have looked at companies that are making an environment that's more beneficial for women. And a lot of women, when they come into this sector, I was reading, and they said that they get turned off by this simple fact that when they go for an interview, the panel is all white men. Yes. And they don't feel like this is a good communication, that this is a positive communication. But the question is that if you're going to interview for a job where there are not qualified women already present in this organization, how can that company then create an interview panel that would have a woman who would ask you and assess you in the best possible way?
Sure, yeah, that's a really interesting challenge companies are facing today where, you know, if you have a lack of representation, how can you address that when you're trying to bring more women in? One of the things I think is we really recommend to women who are going through this process is maybe if that panel doesn't necessarily look like you, ask them questions about diversity, what they think about it, what their company's doing. If they're not able to articulate good answers for you, it's a sign they haven't really thought that through, and there's still going to be a lot of issues. But sometimes a company may not be there just yet. They may not have enough women to be on every panel. But if they can talk about what they're doing and why it's important for everyone at the company, that's a really good sign. And kind of to the point that was just talked about, for our Top Companies for Women Technologists program this year, almost half of our participating companies were not traditional technology companies. That role is really pervasive across industries today. So while it may take a little while to find that right company, there are organizations out there that are going to be supportive. So it's a matter of finding the right spot.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we have a video question. So let's take a look at what this person wanted to ask.
I'm a woman. I'm working for an IT company in Saigon, Vietnam. My male coworkers are often given more important tasks that I'm equally capable of handling. How should I address this situation?
So this is something that women in Saigon are talking about, women in the United States also talk about, that we have ideas, we know how it's done, and yet we're not even considered when the conversation happens. Paula, what should somebody in this position do?
Yeah, this is something that I talk about regularly with, frankly, anybody that's building their career, but that's particularly challenging, I think, obviously, for women when we're minority. You know, my big thing is we've just got to be more assertive in raising our hands. And that's one of the things that I did in my own career, that don't wait to be asked. raise your hand and basically step forward. And, you know, the more you do that and the more you demonstrate that you're quite capable of that, then the best chance you will be asked. But I always say raise your hand and as well advocate, you know, in teams and other sections, if you will, of the company for that representation and those opportunities. And I think as well, besides the individual, many of the tech companies and certainly inside of Intel, we need to do a better job at making sure that we're training our leaders, some of them or the majority of them, many times male, to understand how to make that open environment. And that's an extremely important part of it. It's two sides of the equation, the askers and those that are raising their hands.
Marie, is this something that children should even be trained about from the get-go as they are learning computer skills and other technological skills?
Sure. I think so. One of the things actually that we're doing at UMBC is we're partnering with an organization called How Girls Code, which is a local after-school coding program in Howard County, Maryland. I'm a founding member of the board, and they actually are running a summer camp at UMBC called Mind Body Coding. And what we do is we have the kids come in, they're 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. They come in, they do robotics, they do coding, and they do yoga. Why do they do yoga? They do yoga because yoga is about mindfulness and empowerment and strength. And so we try to connect that with the technology, that you can be a strong person who knows what you want and advocate for what you're trying to accomplish. I know, you know, in my own personal life, I've had all kinds of leadership training and opportunities, but those didn't always come easily to me. And a lot of people around me, even now, I'm an associate dean, I've chaired committees, I'm on panels like this, you know, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter, but there's people in my own environment who do not think of me as a leader, who do not put me forward for opportunities. And you just have to keep trying and finding a way. You're like the water. You're just flowing. And when there's a dam here, just flow around that way. There's another avenue. And there's a lot of implicit bias. So you need to be aware that the fact that people are not putting you forward for opportunities, they may not be consciously aware that they're doing it. They're not doing it on purpose because they don't think that you can do the work. They're doing it because they're busy and they're thinking about a lot of different things and they got to get something done, and they see this guy who they know they can go to and they know they're going to get it done. So you just have to chip away at that and sit down with that person and say, I'd really like an opportunity to do this. And if you don't say it, you can't expect them to magically know it. So I think that's one thing that you really have to like get that courage.
Right. But diversity and inclusivity, these are right now buzzwords in the tech sector. But there are those men who are also feeling threatened by it. The New York Times actually recently did an article in which it profiles some men who feel that this whole debate on inclusivity has gone too far, that this is only benefiting women, and that men are actually now being discriminated against, that they're being passed over for promotions. And right before this article was published, Google actually had to fire. They decided to fire an engineer who wrote a memo in which he basically described how men and women have not only do they have different capabilities, but that women are not capable of doing a lot of the technical jobs. And Google let go of him, and it created a lot of controversy about how to discuss gender and how to bring this into the conversation in a meaningful way. So, Danielle, you have worked in this field. How do you take this conversation to men without making them feel like they should be threatened, or that this is something that only helps women at the expense of men?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm happy to address it. You know, a company of Google's size, certainly, like a lot of the tech companies the folks in the audience work for, we're big enough that we're a microcosm of society. And just like society right now is grappling with questions of who do we include, how do we value difference, how do we talk about equity and justice for everybody, companies grapple with that inside their walls too. And I think that's what you saw play out in this case, in the memo. What I can tell you is it was an incredibly painful experience for Googlers to see this happen at our company. And by the way, it wasn't just an incredible, a painful experience for women, but for the male allies who do support their colleagues, who know how hard their colleagues work and how smart they are and how capable. I do think it's really about teaching everybody that diversity isn't a zero-sum game, right? Hiring somebody who's diverse doesn't mean that people who are in the majority aren't going to get chances and opportunities anymore. Promoting, more women or more women and men of color doesn't mean that white and Asian men aren't going to get promotions and opportunities. And I think when we pit groups against each other, when we have a mentality of scarcity, we let fear of difference creep in, and it drives a wedge between us. So I spend a lot of time talking about remembering that diversity is not a zero-sum game. Having difference that we value and bring to the table, it makes companies better. It makes products better. It makes businesses better. And nobody needs to be afraid of difference. It raises the bar for all of us. That's a conversation that we need to keep having over and over and over again.
Now, Google decided to fire this engineer, and we've also seen other high-profile cases because of sexual harassment. The CEO of Uber he first apologized, then he resigned, and there are some other high-profile cases that have also come up. But what you see is that it's a small world. You leave one company or you are pushed out of one company, but then there's some other company that knows that you have other good skills, and they will pick you up. So how do you actually change the culture? Because when somebody who has wronged someone or has admitted their mistake but are given a wonderful opportunity somewhere else, what reason do they have to change their behavior?
Well, the reality is that, again, like Danielle says, we're a microcosm of society. And, we see some of that behavior going on right now in a lot of different segments and sectors. But I would say the important thing is to create the dialogue. Same thing with the inclusive culture and making sure that that the issues that we see in the press or that we are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, that you create the mechanisms inside of your company to have those conversations and to listen to each other. The reality is that we don't listen to each other sometimes as much as we can and should, and also give the opportunities for people who are experiencing difficulty or feeling excluded or underrepresented, have the opportunity and have mechanisms by which they can raise that issue. Not just in a group setting, but also individually. And many of us are creating those dialogues and those meaningful conversations to help change and listen to what each other's feeling and what we're experiencing, and then trying to create more of that shared perspective.
Next up, we have a question from Voice of America's global community of listeners and viewers. Let's take a look at the question.
I find it challenging to be an obvious minority within a homogeneous industry. Just look at me. I don't look anything like a software engineer in many ways. I find it, I've been in the industry for 2 decades, 15 of which have been with the same company. There are many challenges of being an African woman in a technical industry. Because if I go to technical events, I'm mostly likely to be mistaken for an event planner or somebody's wife. My question is, how does one overcome those hurdles of the confusing role? And then my other question is, with the maternity leave policies that are out there in place, how does one choose between having a career and having children?
So what does a software engineer look like?
So, I mean, I'd like to say that when I look at you, you look just like a software engineer to me, and it makes me really happy. I mean, I think that it helps to find people, even if there's only a few people around you, who feel that way, who feel like you do look like a software engineer to them, and they want to help you build that sense of respect. The other thing that's helped for me a lot is when I feel that way, I look behind me at the younger women. I look at the children. I look at people who might look up to me as a role model, and that lets me lean in, right? I mean, that really gives me, it gives me such a sense of empowerment that if I lean into this thing that feels uncomfortable and hard, and I feel like people aren't treating me the way I want to be treated, but I look behind me and I think, okay, I'm going to do it for them. It changes your whole perspective, and it really gives you such a sense of power and accomplishment if you can be the one to pave the way for somebody else. So I think thinking a little bit about, you know, who you might be a role model for, or who you might be creating opportunities for, can help you to kind of rethink that feeling of being stuck and an outsider.
Danielle, what have you tried at Google that has actually helped bring more women technologists on board and retain them?
Yeah. You know, for us, I think it really is about role models and sponsorships, really making sure that as executive women, we do the work in paying it forward and in sponsoring and bringing other people along and advocating for each other. That's hugely important for retention and progression. As a female leader myself, I make it a priority for my organization to hire men and women of color, to hire more women, because I believe that diversity makes us stronger. As for hiring, I think it's about breaking some of the biases we have, looking for talent in new and different places, hiring people that aren't like us, you know, having these panels that sort of more accurately assess talent and in ways that break down biases.
So how do you do that? More trainings? Because trainings are the last thing that any employee, I mean, I can speak for myself, I do not enjoy trainings. So how do you actually implement that?
Yeah. So I do think training is part of it, right? You definitely want to train people to be aware of their bias, but it can't stop there. You also have to train people to take conscious action. And I spend a lot of time talking to managers about conscious actions they can take. Here's a very simple one. When you have an open role, post it instead of tapping those people on the shoulder that you naturally know and are part of your network. You know, actively have talent reviews and talent drafts in your organization to plan career paths for people. You know, when you do interview, have a diverse panel of interviewers and have a diverse panel of candidates that get you out of your ruts and get you thinking differently. Those are the small conscious actions that people can take every day on the job that doesn't require classroom training, and I think that's important.
Before we go to our next social media question, because the good thing is people are talking, they want to hear more about on this topic. I also want to touch upon the work-life balance that our previous question touched upon. Apple built a $5 billion facility, but there's no childcare center on that facility. And there is a lot of buzz about the fact that maybe Apple was trying to send a signal to employees that this is what we want from our employees, and this is work, life, children are messy, children make it difficult to have a set schedule. So maybe, I mean, this is what people are saying on the internet. So when it comes to work-life balance, one would think that technology is a sector that would make it easy because you can have flex hours, you can work remotely. This really shouldn't be a problem. So how can a woman strike balance? Michelle, what have you seen from your research? How are companies making it easier for women?
Sure. One of the really encouraging things we saw in the data this year was that flexible working opportunities have increased across organizations. Many companies now offer remote working or flexible hours as options for women working at their companies. So it's really great to see that you have some opportunity to kind of fit your life into your work schedule. One of the challenges we're seeing with that, though, is as you have more flexible opportunity to work from other places, that's turning into a little bit of a sense that you need to always be available, and that you have to make up for that double later in the day if you do take some time off. So we're really trying to adjust that culture to the idea of, like, you shouldn't have to be working 24 hours a day. You should really be able to use that flexibility, get your job done, but also make sure that you're present for your life.
So we are, like I said, getting a lot of questions from our social media community. Next up is a question that we received. Let's see what that question is. So the question has come from Pakistan, and it's, how do women who don't have access to jobs and technology close the gaps? So again, going back to the very basics. You don't have access, but you want to build a career. What should you do? Where should you look?
Yeah, so I'll comment a bit for my experiences. And obviously around the globe, there are different ways, but the access to the internet is a key element of that. And there's so many resources online that are free and available to everyone that you can do at any time of the day or night to increase your awareness and capabilities. And so that's one mechanism, as well as many technology companies are bringing that to the communities and augmenting what the government and other private sector groups are doing. And so public and private sector need to work together, I think, to provide more opportunities and availability. And I think that's happening both virtually and physically. But
I think one of the things that I've been working on at UMBC is working with the National Academy of Engineering to create a program called the Grand Challenge Scholars Program at UMBC. And the Grand Challenges are 14 big problems facing society, and some of them have to do with access to clean water and electricity. And I think, honestly, in some environments where you don't have access to technology and education, you also don't really have access to some of these other things that are more fundamental. And so sometimes the first step is to create better infrastructure for other aspects of living so that you have the time, if you're not spending 6 hours a day providing clean water for your family, then that lets you start to think about access to the internet and sort of the next level of things. So I don't know how much of that might be tied in for this particular person, but I think it's a holistic kind of challenge.
So think outside the box and look at other avenues as well. There is a lot more to talk about, and we will continue talking. In the next half hour of our program, we will take more questions from our online community as well as questions from our audience that has joined us here. So stay with us and so we can continue this conversation.
The tech ecosystem is one that sadly has not been very welcoming to women.
We have a joke inside here at the Institute that if you don't know what the representation of women in leadership is, you can always guess 17% and you're always going to be almost right.
In the venture capital space, they will pretty openly say things like, if you're a woman entrepreneur, you are either hot or you have a good business model.
I joke that I chose the profession where I never have to stand in line at the bathroom because it's 5 to 10% of investing partners are women.
Every single woman who works in tech has been in this situation where they had an idea and they shared it, and then nobody picked up on it, and then it was repeated by a male colleague, and everybody thought it was brilliant.
Leaders at the top, regardless of where their workforce sits, more and more are starting to recognize that diverse and inclusive teams perform better over time. And I think that's the thing that should be trumping all of this. To build better organizations, we need diversity and inclusion. That's just it. Homogenous organizations aren't as good.
There is no diversity in their organization but one or two. I think it's important to ask why, acknowledge that there is a shift in the paradigm, and kind of work towards finding a solution. Because if we don't, then we're not going to see the difference.
A lot of male engineers, when they talk about our customers, will be like, oh, when he wants this. And I'm like, or when she wants this, or when they want this. And just sort of break down the structures that reinforce men building products for men or only thinking about men in design and technology.
I would say that it's really important to create your own opportunity, and the really exciting thing about technology, it's very open source, and that is empowering to anyone.
I'm really excited to see as this generation of women in technology grows and matures into more leadership roles, to just see the next generation of women will have it that much easier.
I love being a woman. I think your identity is what you wake up every day and feel, and I don't know, do what you love.
Welcome back. You're watching Breaking Through. This is a special town hall organized by Voice of America and the Anita Borg Institute. And what we're talking about today is something that could affect everyone, and that's women's access to technology. And we also have executives from the Silicon Valley, so we can talk about how women can build successful careers in this field. We we had two separate panel discussions, and now we have brought back all of our panelists. So we have this wonderful opportunity for you to get some answers. So go online if you have any questions. Now is the time to ask them. And right now we have an audience member. If you could please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
My name's Erin Wright. I find myself in a situation, I like coming to these things because I find them inspirational and I like to get great advice from things. I think what's disappointing to me is, I'm at a mid-senior level, and I actually feel like I'm in worse shape now than I was when I started in the tech industry in the mid-90s through the early 2000s, right? I feel like I have more barriers in front of me as someone who's trying to advance and more walls in front of me than I do now. It seems like we're not really able to multitask the problems, right? So we have racial issues, we have women, and we have all kinds of issues, but we can only really focus on one, and our allies are really only focused on one. So I guess what I'm looking for is, I'm kind of running out of time, right? So everybody talks about raising your hand. There's only so many times you can raise your hand and get beaten down before you're like, resigned to the fact that I'm now in my mid-40s, and I don't have a lot of time to move on to the career. So the path that I have really is not to stick with it and stay at the company I want to stay at, but to actually advance, I'm going to have to go somewhere else to do it and hope that they look at me as a middle-aged woman, right? See past that, plus the fact that I'm a woman, plus that I'm a woman in technology, and try to get forward that way. So what's your advice on that?
Paula?
Yeah, I'll make one comment there. So the reality is that we need to do a better job across the industry. But I agree with you. As an individual, it's something that I personally look at. I also coach others to look at. Look at the company holistically and make your decisions accordingly as to how you're seeing that representation and how they're publicly committing to diversity, and even as much as how they're posting their diversity numbers, goals, etc. I think that's important because of what you're talking about relative to having a commitment to change. But I would say as well, two things that I've seen that's really important for people like yourself, for companies like mine and others to do is to find ways to have more of that matching and sponsorship for women along their career path, and frankly, diverse employees in general. That's where we've really been able to move the needle in a much more meaningful way. And then the other is to also advocate for more structured succession planning, for making sure that we have diverse considerations when we're looking at people in roles, and also making sure that jobs are posted so that everyone has an opportunity to be considered. Those are the ones that I see moving the needle the most at my company. So make sure that you're choosing companies that are doing those kinds of things to make those changes.
Danielle, since you are in an executive position, I would also like you to add a little bit to this answer.
Yeah. So first, I just want to say I really appreciate you sharing so openly the experience you're having, and I'm sorry you're feeling stuck. I think a lot of us have experienced that from time to time in our careers, and I always think about that time I was sort of at those mid to senior levels as actually being the most challenging. I think in those early days, you're moving fast, you're growing, you're taking on a lot of responsibility. Certainly in an executive level, things get easier and you've sort of found your career path. And the hardest time was always just as you've described, and you're just getting pushed from all sides and you're tired, and you do feel, I often say it's not like we aren't leaning in, it's that, we're leaning until we fall over because the structures and the systems aren't there to support us. I do think it may be really a time for good self-examination and reflection to say, is this still a company where I feel like I can do my best work and bring my best self? Is my talent and opportunity valued? I know it can be scary to make a change. As an executive who's just made a change, and I'm 2 months into a brand new company, I can tell you it can also be exhilarating and challenging, and it's a whole new opportunity for personal growth for me. So I know change can be scary, but I'm here to tell you it can also be a really positive and refreshing way to experience your career as well. Yep.
All right, next up we have.
Hi, my name is Victoria Dominguez, and I work for Intel. And I would like to have your opinion on something that I've been thinking about. It is my perception that women that get to the higher executive levels tend to surround themselves by men in their staff. I don't know if that is something unconscious, or if, I don't know if they are thinking that it's a sense of security, but at least that's my perception, and I would like to hear from you, your opinion on that.
Intel.
Yeah, so that's not been my experience, but you know, obviously you've seen that, and I'm sure others in the room. But again, I think this is where the challenge is for most leaders to find the right talent around them. I'd be very disappointed if that were the case, because it's been my experience, you know, personally, that when we get more diverse leaders, that they tend to have diversity or less bias, if you will, in putting together their teams. And so I can't answer the very specific situations that you're talking about, but I think it's important for all leaders to be showing the representation in the face of the employable community that is around us and in the company. So, but see me afterwards, because I'd like to help you with that.
May I clarify something? My perception is not only in Intel. Okay. I mean, I've been working on other companies, but that's what I have observed through my career. It's not only for Intel.
Yeah.
Should women help each other simply because they're women?
Well, realistically, leaders should be helping the full employee community. I personally coach women, I coach men, I coach the full complement of the employee base. But I do think that as a female, that I have an additional responsibility to help foster the community that I identify with as well, which is the female community.
And next up we have
Lisa Marie Manso.
Lisa, what's your question?
So my question is, in a middle management position, I've mostly come up through the ranks of solution selling, so sales, but with a technological background. It's been great to embrace the passion of technology and do the work in a little bit of a different way outside of coding. But my question is, you know, have you seen specific examples where women can contribute going up that career path versus the product career path?
I guess it's, again, a question for the Silicon Valley executives. So Danielle, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one great thing about working in tech is just the incredible growth and the opportunity that brings. And in my own career, I've been on the sales side, I've been on the business side, I've been the technical assistant to the CEO, and I've worked in people operations or HR. It was a lot about being flexible, being able to grow, being agile, and sort of my skill set and my capabilities. And like Paula said, being really unapologetic about raising my hand and taking on jobs that scared the heck out of me and made me really uncomfortable. And I do think that's the magic of tech, is that there's so much growth and so much opportunity. There's not a lot of barriers to what we can do. And career switching in general is something that people do a lot of, and it's pretty encouraged. So that's part of the reason why I think I stay, and I love it.
Thank you. I'm Brooke Castaneda, and I'm also at Intel. So it's great to see Paula and Danielle representing both as employees of Intel and then previous employees of Intel. So my question really is about different strategies that women can implement to really bring their voice to the table that maybe haven't been mentioned so far. And then if we have, to complement that, any recommendations for women who also have young children and how to really integrate that work-life balance in and have really positive conversations with coworkers about that balance.
Silicon Valley executives, but okay, Marie, if you have something to add to it, of course, by all means.
Sure. So the work-life balance and the children, I think the thing for me, I have two wonderful grown daughters, and I brought them to work, and they were in my life, and I made it really clear to everybody that my priority was my kids. Not that I was going to not get my job done, but that was the most important thing to me, and that if something came down to a choice, which it doesn't very often, luckily, that my family was my priority. And I think that doing that, again, it's part of the looking behind you and thinking, who am I setting an example for? Who am I building some infrastructure for that I can pave the way for the next person to come forward and be successful with that? I think it's really important. The other, you asked about strategies that we haven't talked about. I think one really important strategy is self-advocacy. And so when you've accomplished something, make sure that people who might care know about it. Like, I didn't realize that early in my career. It took me probably 10 years into my academic career, maybe 5 years into my academic career, before it occurred to me to tell my boss and my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss what I had just done. Hey, I was just elected to this, professional organization. And when I started doing that, things snowballed. Like, sometimes they would write little stories about me, or they would invite me to be on committees that I never would have been invited to be on before. And I didn't realize the power of that, just sharing information. It's not bragging. It's not showing off. It's just letting people know what you've done and what you've accomplished. And it lets people start to think about, and I'm thinking back about Erin's question about becoming a leader. How do you do that? Part of it is you present yourself that way. You tell people what you're doing that is the thing that you want to be doing.
And may I add something to this life-work balance issue, since we have younger audiences as well, and we're talking about breaking the norms. I just want to say that it's also okay if you choose your career. It's okay if you choose not to have children. It doesn't make you less of a woman, and it does not make you a bad person either.
I'm just curious, and before we started this discussion, Danielle and Paula, you were both saying that there are a lot of positive stories too that don't really come out in the media. So when a young woman is starting her career in this field, what kind of expectations should she have?
That's a great question. I think the panelists from the first discussion brought this out well. I want women to have really high expectations for what it's like to be a woman technologist. I want them to believe that they can reach the highest levels of an organization, that they can thrive by being themselves and being authentic. I want them to enter a workplace where they believe colleagues treat them fairly and with respect, and that they can always make their voices heard and never feel like making their voices heard is something they get penalized for. And like you said, Sarah, there are so many positive things about being a woman technologist. That's why things like Grace Hopper, all I heard here was a celebration of women in computing. And I was talking to Googlers this morning, and I actually said, I think what we need to figure out how to do is take the spirit that we experienced here at Grace Hopper, the spirit of celebration, and bring it back to our day jobs, bring it back to Silicon Valley and our schools and the work we're all doing. Because sometimes I think in the fury of the everyday and in the wake of the injustices we face, we forget that celebration, we forget that pride. And that's really important for young women pursuing careers in tech, I think.
All right. Please, thank you so much, Danielle. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi everyone, I'm Aisling Conroy from HP Inc. in Ireland, and I really like the point that Marie made about using yoga as a support activity to technical activities. And I was thinking, maybe for the rest of the panel, are there other support activities that you think would be worthwhile for women in tech to kind of make more of a holistic individual?
Yeah.
I can speak to that.
Sure, absolutely. For me, in school, for Society of Women Engineers chapter, they say, hey, we're having pizza. Let's go have a hairdo. And then when we all gather up and we go get our hairs done, they say, hey, why don't we all talk about Python? Yeah.
And Nicole?
Yes, and I actually came from some pretty deep roots also as a video gamer. And that ended up playing a big role in my work, funny enough, bringing educational technology and educational gaming together. So finding something that's just similar or kind of like your work even, or if it's even wildly different, finding something that you can kind of make an amalgamation out of, something that you'll be very proud and that will offer you that reprieve. In order. I still game regularly, and it's the way that I keep my programming skills, my logic skills, I mean, exploration. These are all keys. You don't want to become static in this industry. So find something that you can merge with it and that you love doing, and maybe that can even piggyback and take your career to the next level.
So there was this one event that we conducted as part of Women Tech Makers Manipal. And for that, the whole idea of the event was that technology may not necessarily be just about coding. There can be so many different positions that women take up in the technical fields. And so we centered a game around it where we tried to revive one of the technologies, in fact, one Google technology that is now that is no longer active now. And we gave all the audiences, we formed groups out of them, and we told them to revive that technology and take roles on as a UI designer, or as a game designer, take different roles as an entrepreneur, and try to sell that idea to their peers. So that was probably one idea which you could find helpful.
All right.
Hi, my name is Jing, and I'm a grad student from NYU. I think a big cause of the gender gap in tech industry is the stigmatized idea of what women are capable of. The host mentioned the memo that a former Google employer sent. Yeah. So I read it, and a lot of the statements in it are plain wrong. But I believe a lot of people do think that. They do believe in consciously or unconsciously that women are mentally unstable or intellectually inferior. I think that's a big issue, and we need to address that more directly. And so my question is, how can we tackle that stigma and the hostility from men?
Thank you so much. So
I'd like to add a comment on that. I think that's a really good point. There are a lot of misperceptions out there, and sometimes our people are uncomfortable acknowledging and really putting a voice to that. So while I don't think it's ever okay to be disrespectful to other people, it is important to have an open space to have that dialogue and really have gender partnership to try and solve this problem. So finding a way to really respect others' opinions. Maybe they're going to say something that's a little bit wrong, but you can open up that conversation and educate people. So finding the right venue for that can be very important.
Yeah, I think, when I read the Google memo, not only are some of the things in there wrong, but I think in some ways, a lot of times the opposite is true. So one of the things that he said specifically was that men are better at systematizing than women. And I think in our culture, at least, it's actually the opposite. It's usually the women who are more organized, who are more planful, who are more strategic in, being ready for contingencies and so forth. And we're trained to do that. We're trained to take care of other people, and that taking care of other people comes from being organized and structured, and that's what you need to be successful in computing. So I think we can speak back to those things very directly by pointing out some of the ways in which women are trained to do things that exactly make them very good at computer science and coding.
Michelle, we're running out of time, so I want you to very briefly touch upon something. One of the strategies that the Anita Borg Institute suggests is that you hold executives accountable. How do you hold your own bosses accountable?
Sure. So it can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable to you yourself put people in a position where they're being held accountable. But I think we really put an emphasis on looking at the numbers. As engineers, we're really interested in data. So I think it's important to look at that from not only a tops-down approach, but within your individual teams. And sometimes it may be a little more uncomfortable, but if you're on a part of a team where having some of that discussion is just something that's being shut down and they're not willing to talk about what you're seeing, take that as a red flag and think about it. Find a team where you're able to have that conversation and continue building inclusion.
Great. Thank you so much. There's so much more to talk about, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. 90 minutes go by really quickly when you're having a great conversation. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists for their time and for their insight, our audience here, as well as all those who joined us online for this event. On behalf of Voice of America, thank you very much. This is Sarah Zaman wishing you the best of luck as you continue breaking through.